have to turn off my phone.
Yeah. On Do Not Disturb and give it to Christina.
Is Christina here? Where is she?
She was right there. She must have moved. I don't know. Did she move back maybe? Oh, she's moved over here.
Hi, Christina.
Hey,
Good evening. How's everyone doing? Good. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you to your support for the festival. Thank you to the board members that are here. And thank you for joining us live on our live stream. We're so excited that we're all here together physically and in person and virtually. I think one of the good things we could agree that the pandemic has brought us is the fact that we are much more open to hybrid, virtual, in-person congregations than we have been in the past. It is my deep pleasure and truly am excited to have this conversation tonight to introduce Tim Myers, who is our new conductor of the festival orchestra. Tim, as I call him, I think more formally Timothy, is a friend of mine for, 11 years, 12 years?
Yeah, actually, it was we met in January of 2012 when I made my debut at Houston Grand Opera, where you were the assistant artistic director and dramaturg.
Oh, for Coffin in Egypt, the Ricky Ian Gordon piece?
Rape of Lucretia.
Rape of Lucretia.
Yeah.
Okay, a fantastic piece by Benjamin Britten. One of these chamber operas that were written in the aftermath of World War II. The UK was bombed out, and they formed this kind of moving, sort of touring opera company. And the operas that they had to create were very small and very malleable so that they go from site to site. And one of those operas, The Rape of Lucretia, which was a star-studded cast, I think directed by Aaron Arbus. Is that right? Yeah.
That's correct.
Who's more well known as a Shakespeare director and not really an opera director. But it was a really cool production.
Yes.
I forgot that's where we started.
Yeah.
So, Tim.
Congrats. I mean, this is amazing.
This is cool.
Thanks for joining me for this interview. I've got lots of questions for you today. So.
Believe me, I like to hear myself talk.
Yeah.
So I think first I want to ask you a few questions about your life, your biography, how you got to where you are today, and then get more into the nitty-gritty about the science of art and the art of science, about what it means to be a conductor and all the exciting stuff about building a festival orchestra anew every single year.
Right, which we are in the middle of. Right
Which
now.
we are, yeah. And I'm going to join you for the Chicago jump in Tuesday. So let us know, why don't we know a little bit about Timothy Myers? Tell us about yourself.
Okay, so I was born in central Kansas, a thriving metropolis of the arts. In a small town, in a farming community. And my original exposure to the arts was in two ways. It was through public radio, the station which we could barely, in most areas of town, get to come in. And then at the time, there was a major management company called Columbia Artists, or CAMI as we called them. And they had a huge roster of talent. And they had this method of vetting talent, and I mean, they called it developing talent, where they would take artists and then they would put them on these tours, on these concert tours, where they would go to these rural areas. And in our case, in Great Bend is the name of the town where I was born and raised. It's called the Great Bend because there's a bend in the Arkansas River. It's not the Arkansas River, it's the Arkansas River.
Oh, okay.
And so it was in this multi-purpose thing that was the municipal hall that was a gym and also had a stage and et cetera, et cetera. And so those were really my first, ways to be exposed to classical music. And then the first time I ever heard an orchestra play live, I think I was about 12 or 13 years old, and the Wichita State University Symphony came and played a concert in that gym.
Wow.
I don't remember the whole program. I do remember that it had Tchaikovsky's first piano concerto on it.
Who was playing? Do you remember?
A faculty member from Wichita State named Andy Trachek. And that was really for me a moment of seeing this organism that we call an orchestra in person and beginning to understand what it actually is, how it functions, how it's built, the synergy that takes place in this kind of ensemble. And then the first professional orchestra I ever heard was the Wichita Symphony. And so from there, I was studying piano. I have 3 siblings, and we were all required to study piano plus an additional instrument. And for my parents, both of whom were just simply amateur musicians, and could read 4-part harmony at the piano, and my dad, this small church we went to, they had a cantata choir for Easter and Christmas, and so he would conduct the choir. And but they just wanted us to do this for edification. And so I didn't even know that people made a living playing music.
Do they?
Well, yeah. I don't know. Ask my wife in the 4th row. But it was just not on my radar at all that this happened. And until I was in high school, and I started realizing that in addition to being a music teacher, there were other paths in music. And so I had a little 3-year diversion between high school and college where I worked in commercial music. I lived in Nashville for a good chunk of that. I worked in film. And I just had a lot of other interests. And then I decided that I really wanted to pursue life as a musician. And so I went to an undergraduate institution, a small private liberal arts school, where I actually did a degree in philosophy so I could only take the music classes that I wanted. But that was when I was really exposed to conducting. Mm-hmm. And I had the great fortune of having my first real conducting mentor during that period of time, who was the music director of the Oklahoma City Philharmonic, a man named Joel Levine, with whom I still speak, a wonderful conductor. Mm. And this was me trying to learn about conducting, is I just picked up the phone and I called every conductor within 250 miles. And I just said, I want to learn about this. I'm curious. And I got voicemail after voicemail after voicemail. And I called the Oklahoma City Philharmonic office and I said, could I please speak with, Maestro Levine? And expecting to get voicemail. And he actually picked up the phone in his office. Cool. And I said, okay, what do I do now? And I said, Maestro, my name is Tim Myers. I'm a student at Southwestern College. I'm really interested in conducting. I've done the conducting courses at my school, and I want to learn more about this craft. And he said, okay, here's what you're going to do, is when we have concert weeks, you're going to learn the scores, or as best as you can, drive down here, which is about a 2.5-hour drive, for rehearsals, and I'm going to put a chair in the middle of the orchestra. And you're going to see how it actually works.
That's good.
And it was amazing because also I'm a pianist. Piano, while I did play other instruments, piano is the only thing that I have pursued at a professional level.
Yeah.
So obviously when you're a pianist, you're not sitting in orchestra rehearsals all the time.
It's very solitary.
Learning
instrument.
how it functions,
Yeah.
right? It is very solitary. Yeah. And so he immediately recognized that it was critical for me to actually start to understand the ecosystem of the orchestra. And so I remember vividly, and I'm getting chills thinking about it right now, going to that first rehearsal and sitting there in the middle of that orchestra and hearing him start rehearsing the prelude to Tristan.
Yeah.
And watching what he did and listening around me. And it was a formative experience, and he took a lot of time to also talk through the scores with me and saying, this is what happens, and teaching me that
What a piece to start with, too. I mean, that's already like a psycho-religious experience,
Yeah, especially when you're a kid from Kansas who doesn't know any better. But for me, he really burned it into me, especially that he had this analogy. He said, being a conductor is like being a lawyer. We have this vision of lawyers from movies, right? That they are in the courtroom in passionate arguments and objecting and, you can't handle the truth and all this stuff, kind of, right? Like movie reference. Like many lawyers, conductors spend 95% of their time studying and learning scores and learning the history, just like a lawyer would learn precedent And he really taught me what the actual craft of conducting is, and I'm forever grateful.
Wow. That's phenomenal. I actually never knew that. That's such a cool origin story. Way better than mine. So, I mean, you were at one point, I think, after you had gone on and started being an active conductor, you became a protege of Lauren Mizell. Who was a pretty well-known conductor. So tell me about what you did with Lauren Mizell, what you did at Castleton, because I think it actually has a lot of reverberations to Spoleto.
It does. So Lauren Mizell at that time was the music director of the New York Philharmonic and had been previously music director of several of the top orchestras in the world, the Cleveland Orchestra, the Vienna Philharmonic, and was a very, very prodigious conductor. He made his debut conducting when he was, I think, 13 or something. Was an incredible violinist and one of these musical minds. He went to public school in Pittsburgh, but just one of these kids that his musicianship and his ability to retain repertoire was phenomenal. I'll get a little bit more to that, but through a variety of circumstances, had the ability I was engaged to prepare something for him. I was living in New York. I was on the conducting staff at New York City Opera. I was a cover conductor at the New York Philharmonic, but I had never been assigned to him.
You also covered Vanessa, didn't you?
At New
York
York
City Opera.
That's right.
Which he conducted last year at Spoleto, in our 2023 festival.
And so I was engaged to prepare something for Maestro Mizell. And at this point, he was 79, and this was the year that he took the New York Phil to North Korea. And which is one of the reasons I was hired to prepare something for him, because he was in North Korea and then on tour with the Vienna Philharmonic. And he was an incredibly imposing figure. He was this titan of a man and a musician, and who could be terrifying. And there are a lot of stories in the industry of how he terrified a lot of musicians just by his demanding nature and the fact that he had ears that did not miss anything. And just through these circumstances, I had a chance to do this work with him and meet him, and he took a real liking to me. And it was at a time where he was starting to slow down a little bit. If you're saying at 79, still doing concert tours all over the world and carrying on a schedule that would make a 30-year-old weary. But for him, it was slowing down. And he really also at that time wanted to start mentoring and passing on what he knew and giving opportunity. And I happened to be right there when it was the perfect intersection of trajectories. And so I had the privilege for between 2.5 and 3 years of assisting him broadly at the New York Philharmonic, at other organizations. He would say, I'm conducting 7 performances of Traviata in Beijing, and you are going to go and prepare everything. And then he would show up at the very end. And so he started putting a lot of trust in me also. The great thing about this for me was I spent all of this time watching one of the true masters at work, day in and day out, and watching him put together some of these gigantic pieces. And by the way, he did most of the repertoire from memory.
Yeah, that was true of Dan.
One time when we were at the Philharmonic was in Vail at the Bravo Festival, I watched him rehearse Rite of Spring from memory.
Yeah.
And including correcting a wrong note.
Yeah. That's part of the allure. I mean, Daniel Barenboim has the same ability.
Yeah.
And would be able. I mean, he conducted, Tristan from memory, and it's just remarkable. And he can tell you where exactly you are messing up, and will do so in no uncertain terms, and sometimes not very kindly.
That's right. That's right. Which is a part of that generation.
It is.
Right.
Yeah.
But
you're nicer.
Things are different now. But you know, I would just, because I was also had my own conducting career starting to blossom. And so I would go to him and I would say, Maestro, I'm conducting my first Schumann 3, you know, with this symphony, and can we go through it? And he would say, okay, great, here's a copy of my score, so you can see my markings. And then we would sit across from each other at a table, and I would have my score and his score to reference, and he would sit on the other side with no score. And he would go through it, bar by bar, and say, and I'm furiously scribbling notes, while he's just going on, just like, and I can hardly keep up. But to learn the repertoire from someone like that is a real gift that, you know, ours is a craft that's handed from person to person.
Right.
And so the other wonderful thing that happened during my time with Maestro Mazel is that he had this large farm in Rappahannock County, Virginia, which is outside of Washington, D.C., about 90 miles. And it was, he had bought this farmhouse, and then, as you can imagine, it's not tremendously expensive as what it is now, but at the time, a plot would come up neighboring, and he would just buy it and collect it, right? So he amassed a large farm, and he started a festival. They took an old chicken coop and turned it into a theater. Not kidding. And so we were doing talking about the Britten Chamber Operas, a series of all the Britten Chamber Operas. And then that developed into a summer festival where they started doing larger scale things. And so I was his assistant when he started the Castleton Festival. Yeah. And how that really relates to my work at Spoleto now is that, similar to what happens here, and the orchestra is built anew every year, is he would bring this collection of players from Curtis and Juilliard and all these, you know, institutions and put them all in one place. And what I learned from that experience was that it's one thing to recruit the right group of musicians. It's an entirely different level to turn them into an orchestra. And I watched him do that. I watched him take that group of musicians and, with his acumen, almost instantly galvanize it into an orchestra. But I learned that part of the craft also in watching how to do that. And that is something for sure that enters my work every day in many ways, but especially in a situation like Spoleto.
Yeah, I mean, what a fascinating, you know, sort of overlapping of experiences, you know, to be able to build a festival orchestra. I mean, you and I both have that in common, because that's, you know, one of the roles that I had at the Barenboim Said Academy with the West Houston Devon Orchestra was to build an orchestra.
Yeah.
You did it as a conductor. I did it more institutionally.
Right.
And then the second thing that is fascinating, and I think you are somewhat unique in this, is that you have, you're very well versed in both orchestral and operatic repertory.
Right.
And that's one of the things that makes you a very attractive choice for Spoleto, because you can conduct Mahler 3 one day, and then the next day do Traviata. Right. I mean, I'll make you do them consecutively. No, just kidding.
I love
but the idea is that you actually have this incredible way of looking at operatic repertory, understanding stagecraft, understanding stage drama, doing it in some of the most, I mean, I think Vanessa is a very challenging piece. I mean, it's a piece that has a lot happening on stage that is challenging, a very, very thick orchestration that you have to balance with the singers. Mm-hmm. Samuel Barber is not kind to voices in that piece, so you have to understand the human voice as well. But then you could turn around and do Brahms 4. Right. Why don't we talk a little bit about the distinction between orchestral repertory and operatic repertory, and what that means for you as a conductor?
I'm glad we're talking about this, because it's something that was part of my journey, and when I became interested in conducting, it was primarily through the symphonic lens. And of course, as young conductors do, you read everything you can get your hands on, all the memoirs and the biographies and autobiographies, and you know, anything that can help you understand the masters. And so I remember in undergrad, when I had gotten really interested in conducting, And I was planning to pursue orchestral conducting and try to go to graduate school for that. But I was reading all of these books, and two things really hit me. That most of the conductors I really liked had come through a more European system that was always through the opera house. So you would become a pianist in an opera house, a repetiteur, and then you might become a repetiteur with conducting possibilities, and where you might get to do a little bit, and then Kapellmeister, and that was really the route that a lot of these famous conductors took. There are a few exceptions, number one being Leonard Bernstein.
Yeah, that's correct.
But also interestingly about Leonard Bernstein is the first time they offered him the music directorship of the New York Philharmonic, he said no. Because he wanted to spend time composing, and he thought it was more important for him to focus on his musicianship. And that really resonated with me, and I thought,
They don't cover that in Maestro, do they?
Yeah, not in any of the films yet. But I thought, okay, how can I create that kind of system for myself? So I started learning about opera, and I went to graduate school then actually for opera and for accompanying singers and playing chamber music. And I had some German, but I had to learn Italian and French. And I learned, I think my first month in graduate school, I learned 60 arias. And while everyone else on weekends was out having a good time, I was in a practice room just chewing through repertoire. But that was something that I felt was really essential because this style of music making, when you understand breath, is completely different. And when I talk to string players or wind players or brass players, I'm thinking about breath and I'm thinking about vocal line and about the dramatic elements of the music in a way that's very particular because I have nearly 100 operas in my repertoire list at this point. So those things all come together. And it was also important for me to be an opera conductor who was equally at home with the orchestra and able to give them specific information that helped bind these things together as dramatically empowering. And so it's something that's been really passionate. From the practical point of view, you can imagine that conducting opera is quite difficult because the orchestra is here. It's very loud in an orchestra pit. The singers are up here. Most of their sound is going over your head. They may be very, very far away from you. And then, you might have offstage bandas to deal with, like in Vanessa, or trumpets and Aida. So, coordinating all these things is very difficult. And then on top of that, you have to make music and make art. So then it's a really nice thing if the next week you're going and there are 85 players on a stage that's well lit and you're all fairly on the same level and all they have to do is kind of interact with you, right? But I'm really obsessed with both of these genres and the language, the vernacular of both of them, because I think they inform each other really beautifully, and I can't divorce one from the other in any measure.
Very well said. So you've had this spectacular career where you've conducted in Santa Fe and San Francisco and Chicago and Wexford and China and Europe and New York, so on and so forth. And you've taken it, like you're the Ernst and Sarah Butler artistic director at Austin Opera, and you've taken it to such great heights. But then you decided to go do an MBA at Harvard Business School. So why don't we talk a little bit about that? What compelled you to do that?
Well,
by the way, for Spoleto, that's we got a good one.
I love to learn. And when the pandemic happened, my wife Christina and I had been having some difficult conversations about that were difficult especially from my point of view of as a performer, you make money when you're performing. And that also requires you to be in one place at a time. And I was at this point where when I was single, it was fine and somewhat,
it was fun.
Dashing and fun. And then when we were married and we could go together, it was great. And then even when we had one child and she had her first European trip at 9 months old, and
Then you have two, and that's a backbreaker.
well,
believe me.
right, exactly. And so then the whole paradigm changes,
Yeah, exactly.
right? And also the stakes are different.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking, as an artist, like, how can I diversify what I do, how I do it, and then and frankly, how I earn money, right? And so we were having these conversations about this, and I was really looking for some answers, and then the pandemic happened, and I lost a year and a half of work overnight. And right at a point when the career was really gaining a lot of momentum. And I viewed that as an existential crisis for the arts and for artists. And I observed many of the leading artists in the world, like dramatic soprano Christine Goerke, openly talking on Twitter about what her plan B might be. And this is one of the singular artists in the world living. And I thought, okay, I need to learn, I need to broaden my knowledge base and my skill set. My application to Harvard Business School was, I need to do this so that I can learn how to create a new model for artists that's a sustainable one, and to help bolster the sustainability of my art form and what we do, and be the highest level contributor possible to the institutions with whom I work. Off the podium just as much as on the podium. And so I applied to Harvard Business School to what's called the Program for Leadership Development, which is their executive MBA. And it's a hybrid program. There's some asynchronous things, and then you have intensive periods on campus. And that was another seminal experience in my life where I learned so much that even altered the way that I think about art and music, but also gave me a lot of tools to work with institutions and artists of how are we planning, how are we thinking strategically, how are we engaging with art, and how is it engaging with the public and with the corporate world and all of these things. And so it was really a life-changing experience for me to do all of these case studies and learn about all of these different things, and then be able to use that as a contributor. And so it was something that I would have never, ever, ever thought that I would do in my life, but ended up being one of the most significant things that I've ever done. And now that institution holds a very, very deep place in my heart.
Right. I don't know if I ever told you this, but you inspired me to apply for the Kennedy School.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, partly because I'm competitive and I wanted to. But yeah. Because we were both talking all the time during the pandemic.
That's right.
And trying to figure out what the next steps would be.
That's right. I remember that.
And so that was you were at the Program for Leadership and Development at the business school, and I thought, well, the Kennedy School's equivalent of that is the nonprofit Masters of Public Administration Executive Certificate. So you inspired me to do that, and I'm thankful to you. So let's talk about how to put together an orchestra.
Well, we are in the midst of it right now. We're on a little lull in the audition tour. So
where have you been? Let's talk from the beginning.
Right. So I'll back up a step previous to that and say that, to assemble the orchestra every year, there's an application process. So people, young, emerging career musicians, early career musicians, apply to come and audition for the orchestra. We had, and then the next step is there's a 7-city live audition tour. We also accept recorded auditions. And it's a very intense thing. This year we had a 45% jump in applications. We had 600 applications for audition this year. And thanks to the marketing department and a lot of things we put into really try and get the word out and recruit. And so we had this big jump in applicants, which is really, really wonderful. But then the challenge you have is then you have all these auditions you have to hear. And so we were in the midst of this audition tour, and we started in LA last Saturday. Sunday we traveled to Miami. We heard auditions in Miami on Monday. We did not fly to New York that night as planned because of weather. Then we had 2 days in New York, and then Thursday we were in Boston. Friday we flew here. Saturday we held auditions in Charleston. After our board activities conclude this weekend, then I fly to Houston, where we have auditions Monday, and then Chicago on Tuesday. At that point, we will have concluded the live audition tour. And we've also, in the meantime, started going through about 150 recorded auditions. So it's a very complex thing. On the tour, it's myself and our orchestra manager, Sean Galvin, who's a 25-year veteran of the Pittsburgh Symphony. And so he and I are on this tour together and hearing these auditions. And from that, we will assemble the orchestra that for the 24 festival will be around 90 musicians who will come to Charleston for the festival.
It's about a 15% acceptance rate.
It is. And of course, but to be transparent, we had 600 applications. Not all of those people end up showing for an audition. Obviously, it's a lot easier to fill out an application than it is to show up and play an audition, right? So there is some attrition there, which basically allows us to stay on schedule in these days that are packed full of a candidate every 7 minutes. And so then the audition process is Sean and I put together very specific excerpt lists for each instrument. And so the auditioners come in, they choose something to start with. So it's usually part of a movement from a concerto or a sonata, but something that they choose that they feel shows them at their very, very best. If they choose well, it's also something that helps them calm down a little bit and kind of, modulate their nervous system a little bit.
So not the third movement of the Barber Violin Concerto.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so, unless you're some monster violinist, right? I mean, and then from there we move into the excerpts. And these excerpts are specifically chosen to, within a matter of minutes, tell us a number of things. Because, as one might imagine, you can come in and really play the beginning of the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto very well, but when we ask you to do something that's from a scherzo, a Mendelssohn, it has to be very light and a very specific bowing technique that requires an incredible amount of control. That's a very different skill as a player than playing big legato sweeping lines. And so we're looking to very quickly ascertain, is this person at a point in their journey where it's a match?
And the excerpts are calibrated to the programming for the festival this year.
In many ways, yes. There are some that are very, very standard, but there are also some, for example, we're doing Mahler's Fifth Symphony at the festival, which opens with this very, very famous trumpet solo. So of course that excerpt is on the list for all trumpet players. Shostakovich First Piano Concerto also has a major solo trumpet part. That is not on the excerpt list, but Ravel's Piano Concerto is. And when I'm talking about these excerpts, I mean these range anywhere from maybe 16 to 40 bars. And so they play the excerpts, and then Sean and I have a scoring system that we developed. And so we are scoring on 4 main categories, which is tone, intonation, time, and musicality. And the musicality part has a little bit of an X factor in it. Because what we're looking for is young musicians who are at a point in their career where they've reached a level of even not just technical proficiency, but even mastery enough where they are really able to engage deeply with the music. And So it's a very, very competitive thing, and then so we score these, and then that ranks them, and then at the end of this process, then we come together and have to actually put together the group of 90 some musicians that will come for the festival.
You told me something very novel. Typical orchestral scoring is out of 10, really. It's 1 is the worst, 10 is the best. When we were doing auditions for the Barenboim Symphony Academy and the West Houston Devon Orchestra, it would always be out of 10. And it would be under, technical proficiency, musicianship, interpretation of rhythm, things like that, the standard categories. You tinkered with that model, and you pushed it to 13 points per category.
Right.
Can you explain why you did that?
I think this is where a little bit of my Harvard Business School data training came into play, was when Sean and I were developing these rubrics, is thinking through the daunting task of hearing up to 600 auditions. And even with specific excerpts that allow you to directly compare and contrast, how do you make a meaningful score that after you've heard the 600th and you have to sit down with that Excel database, how do you actually then take the quantitative and merge it into the qualitative? And so we decided that we were going to, and so we started looking at this scale of 1 to 10, which is like what everything is judged on. I mean, the Olympics, it's sort of, the metric du jour. And just thinking about what of that scale actually gets used, and how meaningful is an 8? How meaningful is a 9? And how meaningful will it be to us 10 days after? And so we decided to kind of blow that paradigm up a little bit and expand it, the range being 1 to 13, so that we had some headroom in 11, 12, and 13 for really standout musicians. And I tell you, we're both very, very glad we did that, because it's already proven to be something, a nuance to the data gathering and then later interpretation.
Yeah. Juilliard, Curtis, and Rice students are all 10s anyway, so it's just like...
I mean,
no slander, Tim.
Well, not every student that comes from a major conservatory is ready for this opportunity. I will say it that way. And so I think we're really glad that we took a hard look at how we're evaluating and then scoring, so that we're really making sure that we capture the best musicians available to us to come to Spoleto.
Good. That's really fascinating. So why don't you talk to us? You told us how you build the orchestra, what's involved in that. I think it's really interesting to kind of get a behind-the-scenes peek of that. And I also think, even if it may seem boring operationally, it's important to understand how taxing and involved that process is.
Very much. It's a huge load on the producing department, led by Liz and Philip, Allison, Courtney, to actually just logistically put this beast together.
Right.
Just for the audition process.
Right. Yeah. And then tell us a bit about how you went to curating and programming the orchestral series this year. What were your thoughts there?
One of the things I love about the Spoleto Festival is that a lot of these artistic decisions are made in community and in collaboration amongst the leadership team. And so there are, of course, parts of the discussion that are, how is the orchestra deployed throughout the festival, right? So we knew Ruinous Gods. When the Prokofiev Romeo and Juliet with LA Dance Project came up, and everybody started to feel very strongly about that.
Doing that with a live orchestra.
Right, that we would be the first to do that production with the live orchestra ever, that specific production. And so that we were like, okay, that's a large amount of orchestral resources that we want to commit to there.
Massive piece.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's giant.
Crazy saxophone piece, actually.
Yeah, it's just all sort. I mean, dulcimers.
Everything is in there.
Who would have thought? So those things, there are those guiding factors. right, of how the orchestra is deployed through the festival. We knew that the chorus orchestra piece was going to be the creation of Haydn. So what resources does that require? And then when we come to programming the orchestra-only concerts, for me there are a few guiding factors. It's a big part of recruiting.
Yes.
Is when you want top players, you have to offer them things that they want to play.
Right.
And
you got to get some meat.
It has to be meaty repertoire.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, since being appointed, I'm also the music director of Austin Opera. And after I was appointed here at Spoleto, I was there opening the season, and 4 players came up to me at the break of the first rehearsal, really excited to tell me that they were alums of the Spoleto Orchestra, and to talk about their experiences. And inevitably, any alum from the orchestra I encounter talks about what I would call like a mountaintop artistic experience, and it's always related to repertoire that they got to play. So they say, can you believe it? We got to play Meistersinger and Heldenleben and they're talking about these big bucket list pieces from the canon that don't come around very often. And especially when you're a young musician, and especially if you do not play in a major orchestra, or have not yet won a job in a major orchestra, to get this repertoire experience is really, really valuable, and not an opportunity that presents itself very often. And so part of it is, what are we using to attract the talent level that we want to have at the festival? And then there are other things that come into it that I'm very passionate about, the idea of cross-pollination between different parts of the festival. And so, Paul was appointed around the same time, or
Paul Bianco.
And so that was really thrilling for me, because I knew that he was a collaborator. And so even before it was public for either of us, we were already kind of having little text conversations about ideas and things. And of course with Joe and Larry also, these same kind of
Joe Miller, director of the chorus, and Larry Blumenfeld, our jazz curator. Sorry.
Thank you. And so, but looking at ways that there can be cross-pollination here. And so, for example, the second orchestra program that we're playing is anchored by Beethoven's Eroica Symphony. So again, that's really the flagship piece that is an important repertoire piece for early career musicians to get under their belt in a meaningful way. And then we were looking for a concerto, and I was very interested in doing Tchaikovsky's first piano concerto, because I like it. I think it's a great,
And that was the piece for you that got you into all of this, isn't it? That's like back when you were 12.
Right, one of them. It was the Shostakovich Piano Concerto.
Oh, Shostakovich. I thought you said Tchaikovsky.
And so I love those concertos, and it's a great style for the orchestra to lean into.
Right.
It's very specific. And I also knew that one Enon Barnaton played the concerto a lot. And so again, this was another conversation with the producing department and you and Paul, but to say, hey, he's down the street. I mean, can we do this together? And fortunately that worked out, and then that piece opens, or that program opens, with a piece by Rina Ismail, who is the composer in residence for the chamber music program. And so we talked about that, and Paul introduced me to Rina, and she and I had a conversation, and there was one piece that I thought, wow, what a great fit for this program. So it was really exciting, because it was immediately a way to get a lot of that cross-pollination going, and start fulfilling that part of the vision.
Is it Rina, Shostakovich, Beethoven?
That's right.
With an intermission?
Yes.
So you have to stay to hear the Beethoven.
Well, you'll definitely want to stay and hear you'll definitely want to stay and hear the Beethoven. I mean, to hear that kind of, hear any of this repertoire with a group of young musicians who are at a high point technically in their playing, and hungry.
Yes.
You put them in a room with the right repertoire, and some real magic can happen.
Yeah, that is
and
electricity.
that is one of the reasons why we program Mahler's Fifth.
Yeah.
Which is a very personal piece for me, that I was elated that we were able to program for my first season.
And that concert opens with a world premiere cello concerto
Right.
by Nathalie Joachim that we are co-commissioning with the New York Philharmonic. We get it before New York. And it's performed by Seth Parker Woods,
Right.
who was at the festival in 2022. So there's a lot of, again, he was at the festival doing work with Taishan Sori, and there's again this kind of sense of cross-pollination. Someone who's more in the jazz world sometimes. So there's this kind of fantastic flexibility here. I mean, the orchestra is also performing with Aoife O'Donovan.
That's right, with bluegrass artist Aoife O'Donovan, whose album, did it drop this week? We're right around release date of her album. She's coming to play to play that album and will be supported by members of the orchestra. And so I think these are all things that typify what's so beautiful about the Spoleto Festival, is these programs that have some sort of chestnut like Mahler 5, but a world premiere cello concerto by a Haitian composer on the first half.
Right.
And playing with Aoife and playing a world premiere opera by Leal Shekar and Lisa Schlesinger. And so all of these, I think, are what creates this ecosystem that attracts wonderful musicians who want to come and make up the orchestra that we hear at the festival.
So why don't you talk a little bit about who your target orchestra fellow is? How old are they? What is their experience? And how have you tinkered with the fellow groups to kind of get a little bit more out of that group?
Yeah. It's a range. I would say that the youngest musician that we will take into the orchestra would be towards the end of undergraduate study. So I would say this is the lower age end of the
22-ish,
age range, 21 in there. And some of these, there are a handful of players we've identified on the audition tour already who are about that age, so they might be a little bit younger than a lot of the other fellows, but were players we identified that had a lot of promise. And we thought, wow, if that person was able to sit in a violin section surrounded by peers who are just a little bit further down the path, that would be a real boost to them, right? So we're being really mindful of it in that way. But then you have a sort of on the upper end fellows who are winning auditions at major orchestras, or were just a runner-up for an audition at the New York Philharmonic.
Right.
And so we're really starting to crest the wave a little bit of really breaking out into a major orchestral job somewhere. And in fact, one of the players that we're really trying to get to come this year, who I think will come as a principal player, has already won a job in a major orchestra. And this would be sort of a nice...
nice holdover until that job begins.
Exactly. So I would say that's the range. We've also added 2 fellow positions, and one is a conducting fellow position. So this is someone who will be at the festival in residence with the orchestra and work closely with me and the orchestra. Our conducting fellow for this coming festival is a young woman named Micah Gleason, who's she's currently at Curtis Institute as a student and is working with Yannick Nézet-Séguin there. And so she'll be with us for the festival. She will conduct the Aoife O'Donovan show and have some other podium time. And so she will work closely with me in assisting in the preparation of these big orchestra programs. So that is a lot of things. That's listening for balance in the hall. That's if I want to go out into the hall and listen, that she will conduct. And then have her own experience, of course. So I'm really excited to add that because as I have had some really wonderful mentors in my career, I'm very keen to do that for others and to pass on whatever I can that helps young musicians. So I'm really excited about that one. The other one that we're even just having more meetings about today that I'm really excited to add is one that seems a little out of the box, but is a really important strategic move, is a digital storyteller fellow. So when I was here last festival as a guest, watching the orchestra function, and of course, I went to rehearsals for things that I wasn't conducting just out of curiosity, and it hit me, all of these musicians are digital natives. And they are all also chronicling every day of their lives on a digital platform. And so how can we do two things? And then when I was appointed, I sort of started taking all of those memories and saying, well, how can that be a leverage point for both the musicians and the festival? And if you start looking at the network effect of this possibility, of if you give these musicians quality digital assets that they can use to promote their own career and to win that next job or win that next audition, these assets are really hard to get, believe it or not. And then they're sharing it under the, tagging Spoleto Festival, that the network effect and the reach of this, the potential is tens of thousands. Right, the way it magnifies. Yeah. And so we've gotten some funding to embed a digital storyteller in the orchestra. So this person will have complete access to the orchestra, to rehearsals, performances, all activities, to me, and to everyone else in this ecosystem of the orchestra, capturing, being a digital storyteller. And then some of that will be used by the marketing department when appropriate to, for their purposes. But the intent of it is to give everyone involved a way to tell the story about what we do and about the orchestra and who the orchestra is and why it's important and what happens at the festival and why the festival is important. And to flesh out that network so that in future years, we have an even more recruiting power. Because our vision really is for the Spoleto Festival Orchestra to be the most vital opportunity for early career musicians in the world. And so this is an important step in that direction.
Great. So I think we got some poetic snapping of the fingers, thank you. I think we have time for some questions. Someone is saying we have time for one question. Is there one single question in the audience?
The question to rule all questions.
Okay, we have one question in the front right here.
Well, I want to know more about the opera, because this is a brand new opera, and you have a brand new composer, an artist, and you're going to be conducting.
I'm not actually conducting Ruinous Gods. We've got a really wonderful guest conductor by the name of Kamna Gupta, and so she is a wonderful conductor, and I'm delighted that she is leading this project. I will be around, and of course, making sure that, especially orchestrally, that all of her needs and desires are met. But it's a very fascinating piece.
Yeah.
Leal is an incredibly fascinating composer who will also be playing some dates as part of the jazz program with her group. Her musical vocabulary and cultural background is incredibly fascinating.
It is, it's very cool.
And she has found a way to coalesce all of these things into a unified voice, which is really interesting. And so you can speak more eloquently to the piece than I can because you've been involved with the whole commissioning process for longer. But I can tell you it's very, very fascinating and something that I'm very excited for the orchestra to engage in.
Yeah, I think it's a piece that's incredibly prescient and importantly topical in a way that Omar was actually in 2022.
It was so great.
Yes. And I also think that the musical language and the compositional language is it's written with such deep conviction. And that's what you look for in an artist. Even if someone is doing something that may be perceived as totally insane, if you're doing it with conviction, you can always believe them. But that's, to be completely frank, the thing that is so spectacular about her work, and this is what you alluded to, is how cohesive of a composer and sort of artist she is. Leal is of Lebanese French descent, and is a spectacular classical violinist. I knew her from the West Eastern Divan Orchestra. She worked with Daniel Barenboim. And then saw her sort of become a free improvisational violinist, working closely with Vijay Iyer at his, in a fellowship at Harvard, and then at Banff. And then also being able to interpolate Arabic maqam and traditional Arabic music. So she's functioning within a classical kind of framework, within a free jazz framework, within an Arabic musical framework, and what you have is something that is really uncategorizable. It's music that you've almost never heard before, but is immediately emotively illicit and quite seductive. I mean, the music is very undulatory. There's a lot of snake-like movements. There is a melodic sense to it, but using a lot of microtones and shades of tones in between the notes on the piano and things like that. As a matter of fact, one of the musicians, Philip Golub, who is her keyboardist in their band, Seraphand, is playing effectively a microtonal piano in Ruinous Gods. So it's a pretty spectacular, unique work. And then of course, you know, the subject matter, that of, you know, a young girl who falls into resignation syndrome because she is a migrant and she can't find her way home, is prescient and topical. Yeah. And it is told with sensitivity, it is told with truth, and even told with a sardonic wit at some times. Mm-hmm. So I think it's going to be a very powerful piece. I don't think we have time for questions. I think that's it. I'm so sorry. Are there internet questions? No internet questions. That's probably a good thing. So thank you very much, and thank you, Chip. This has been fabulous. This is so cool. Thank you.